How will members of Congress receive Netanyahu's speech, and what are the implications of Biden's announcement of more aid to Ukraine, while he's also in Europe the day after D-Day? Joining me now to assess these developments is John Sitilides, Senior Fellow at the National Security Program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. John Sitilides, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So what's included in this $225 million aid package that the Biden administration just announced that it's sending to Ukraine, and will it be enough to help Ukraine?
Well, there's a very important distinction in terms of what is in the package and what a number of the president's critics have called for. They would like for the United States and for the NATO alliance to provide far more of the longer range ATACMS type missiles that are able to strike deep into Russian territory, perhaps hit Russia's supply lines and oil depots. And what the president has done here is kind of a balance between providing Ukraine greater ability to strike inside of Russian territory, but within a very limited sphere, so that only those areas that are most important for the Russian offensive against Kharkiv and other areas in eastern Ukraine can be hit, but not to strike deep into Russian territory. In other words, to be very careful to move forward on the escalation ladder, giving Ukraine more firepower, more defensive capability, but not in any way that forces Russia's hand so that it then in turn escalates against Ukraine and against Ukraine's supporters.
Talk to me now about the significance of announcing this military package during the anniversary of D-Day in front of our European allies.
Yeah, it's very difficult to read the president's mind on this, but I think certainly there's a sense that there may be a breaking of the cohesion that we've seen to date in the NATO alliance for the better part of the last 2.5 years. With the Euro parliamentary elections coming up in several days, we're going to see a significant push, I think, to the center-right parties, but that's based mostly on issues such as illegal migration, on climate policies, and a whole host of issues that may not have to do so much with Ukraine, but there is a greater debate among European capitals about whether or not there's a viable exit strategy for Ukraine. And ultimately, as the country is being destroyed, who is going to pay for the reconstruction of Ukraine, which right now is being estimated to cost anywhere from $500 billion to $1 trillion inside of a European Union that is essentially deindustrializing before our very eyes because of a number of failed policies regarding energy, dependence on Russia, and now dependence on China to power their economies.
All right, now I want to switch gears here. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address Congress next month. This will make him the first world leader to do so 4 times. He's currently tied with Winston Churchill. What message do you expect to hear?
I think if I had to predict that Prime Minister Netanyahu will try to emphasize 2 major points here. One is that Israel has no choice but to take the military means necessary to destroy Hamas's military capabilities to the greatest extent possible. Now, no one believes that they're going to be able to do so 100% anytime in the near future, but essentially to prevent any type of atrocities of the magnitude of October 7th from ever taking place against Israeli civilians for the foreseeable future. But I think it has to be very important here to mention that this is tied to a larger strategy. This is really not about Israel and Hamas. Hamas is a proxy militia for the Iranian regime. And I think what Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will intend to do here, especially with the Congress, but also far more broadly to the American people, remember, this is going to be sandwiched between the Republican and the Democratic Party conventions in mid-July and late August of this summer, that Iran is the genuine menace to Middle East peace, to stability, and to American interests, assets, bases, and our allies in the Middle East. So it's going to be a 2-pronged speech, I believe. Support Israel to do what it must to extinguish Hamas's military capabilities, but let's make sure Iran does not achieve a nuclear weapons capability. That is something that I think we're losing focus on because we're so concentrated on the war in Gaza.
How would you gauge the reaction from members of Congress about it?
Well, it seems to date that most Republicans remain strongly supportive of Israel's efforts to, again, destroy Hamas's military capabilities. You do have an increasing non-interventionist wing inside the Republican Party that is more concerned not so much about what is happening between Israel and Hamas, but placing it in the larger context of an ongoing war with no clear exit strategy between Russia and Ukraine, and of course the need to remain focused on the strategic threat to American security, and that's the Chinese Communist Party, against Taiwan, against Japan, against all of the ASEAN countries in the South China Sea. So we have to place what's happening in the Middle East in a broader international context. The real interest is going to be in what's happening in the Democratic Party, because the president seems to be trying to have it both ways, standing by Israel as a longtime American ally in the Middle East, but also placating a very vocal, very vehement wing of the Democratic Party that seems to actually loathe Israel and perhaps even the Jewish people for the sake of the Palestinian cause. And unfortunately, here we see Palestinian civilians being sacrificed by Hamas deliberately as cannon fodder in order to try to humiliate Israel in American eyes and before international eyes.
Do you see that Netanyahu's address will soften any tensions between U.S. and Israel?
I don't know. That's going to be a great question. We'll have to see what kind of a speech Netanyahu gives, what takes place between now and July 24th, and also what's going to be the domestic politics regarding Netanyahu's speech. We don't know how disrupted the speech is going to be. We don't know what will be happening in Washington with pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian supporters. I think we'll have to look to see what the Netanyahu speech looks like, and of course, what are the conditions in the war between Israel and Hamas over the next 4 to 5 weeks.
John Sitilides, thank you very much for your time here today.
Thanks for having me.